Behind the golden gates of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal tradition echo through marble corridors, a moment of unprecedented tension unfolded that would forever change the dynamics of the British royal family. It was a crisp autumn morning when Queen Camilla, dressed in her signature pearl necklace and navy coat, approached what she believed was simply another wing of her home. But what happened next would send shockwaves through the palace staff and reveal the hidden fractures within the House of Windsor. The guard's firm hand raised in front of her path. The words that followed, "Not allowed," would mark the beginning of a royal drama that exposed secrets, tested loyalties, and forced a family already under public scrutiny to confront truths they had kept buried for far too long. This is the true story of how a simple attempt to enter a private wing became the catalyst for revelations that no one saw coming. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla made her way through the familiar corridors. She had walked countless times since marrying King Charles. The soft click of her heels against the polished marble floors echoed in the grand hallways, a sound that had become as routine as breathing over the past year since the coronation. She carried herself with the practiced grace that came from years of royal training, her posture perfect despite the weight of the crown that wasn't physically on her head, but always present in her bearing. On this particular Tuesday in October, Camilla had awakened with a sense of purpose that seemed different from her usual schedule of royal duties and public appearances. She had been meaning to explore more of the castle's private quarters, areas that Charles had mentioned in passing, but that she had never had the time to properly visit. As the new queen consort, she felt it was important to understand every aspect of what would be her home for the rest of her life. The previous evening, during a quiet dinner in their private dining room, Charles had been unusually distant. His conversations were shorter than usual, and he seemed preoccupied with matters he didn't share. When she had asked about his day, he simply mentioned some administrative issues regarding the private wings of the castle, and changed the subject to their upcoming trip to Scotland. Camilla had learned over the years that Charles sometimes needed space to process things, so she hadn't pressed the matter further. Now, walking through the castle in the morning light, she found herself drawn to the East Wing, a section of the castle that she realized she had never properly explored. The corridor leading to this area was different from the rest of the castle's public and semi-public spaces. The walls here were adorned with more personal photographs rather than the formal portraits that dominated other areas. She noticed pictures of Charles as a young man, some with Diana, others with his sons William and Harry during their childhood years. As she continued down the hallway, the atmosphere seemed to change. The staff members she encountered here moved more quietly, spoke in hushed tones, and seemed surprised to see her. A young maid carrying fresh linens actually startled when she saw Camilla approaching and quickly curtsied before hurrying away with her eyes downcast. This reaction struck Camilla as odd since the castle staff had long since grown accustomed to her presence and typically greeted her with warm, respectful familiarity. The hallway eventually led to an ornate wooden door that was different from the others she had passed. This door was older, made of dark oak with intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story of their own. The brass handle was polished to a perfect shine, indicating regular use despite the door's obvious age. There was something about this entrance that drew her in, a sense that whatever lay beyond was important to understanding the history and secrets of the castle that was now her home. As she approached the door, she noticed a guard stationed nearby, something that wasn't typical for the private family quarters. The guard, a middle-aged man in the traditional uniform, stood at attention with the kind of rigid posture that suggested he had been given very specific instructions about this particular post. His eyes followed her movement with an alertness that seemed heightened compared to the usual casual acknowledgement she received from palace security. Camilla paused before the door, studying the carved details more closely. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of master artisans from centuries past. She could make out figures that seemed to represent various royal activities, hunting scenes, formal ceremonies, and what appeared to be family gatherings. It was the kind of artistic detail that Charles would appreciate, given his love for traditional craftsmanship and historical preservation. The guard cleared his throat softly, a sound that made her look up from her examination of the door. His expression was polite but tense, as if he was preparing for something he hoped wouldn't happen but suspected might. Camilla smiled at him warmly, the same genuine smile that had helped endear her to the British public over the years of overcoming initial skepticism about her role in the royal family. She reached for the door handle, assuming that as queen consort, all areas of the castle that weren't specifically designated for staff or security purposes would be accessible to her. After all, this was her home now, and Charles had never mentioned any restrictions on where she could go within their private living spaces. The brass handle felt cool under her palm, as she began to turn it. The guard's reaction was immediate and startling. He stepped forward quickly, his voice firm and clear as he spoke the words that would echo in her mind for hours afterward. His training had clearly prepared him for this exact moment, though his slight hesitation suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with what he had been instructed to do. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, creating an awkward silence that neither seemed prepared to break. Camilla's hand remained on the door handle, her mind processing not just what had been said, but the implications of what it meant. She had been queen consort for over a year, had participated in state ceremonies, had welcomed foreign dignitaries to this very castle, and now she was being told she couldn't enter a room in what she considered her own home. Her first reaction wasn't anger, but confusion. She studied the guard's face, looking for some sign that this might be a misunderstanding, or perhaps a security measure she wasn't aware of. The guard maintained his professional demeanor, but she could see a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, as if he was following orders he didn't entirely understand or agree with. Behind her, the sound of footsteps in the corridor seemed unnaturally loud. A member of the household staff appeared, walking quickly toward them with a purposeful stride that suggested he had been summoned or had been waiting for this exact situation. His expression was carefully neutral, the kind of practiced blankness that palace staff perfected when dealing with delicate situations. The staff member, whom Camilla recognized as one of Charles's personal assistants, approached with a respectful bow before speaking in the kind of measured tones that were used for delivering information that needed to be both clear and diplomatically phrased. His words confirmed what the guard had indicated, but added layers of protocol and explanation that only deepened her confusion about what was really happening. As she stood there, still holding the door handle, Camilla began to realize that this moment represented something much larger than a simple restriction on her movement within the castle. The way the staff member's eyes avoided direct contact, the tension in the guard's shoulders, and the unusual quiet that seemed to have fallen over this section of the castle all pointed to something more significant than a routine security measure. The ornate door before her no longer seemed like just another entrance to explore. It had transformed into a symbol of boundaries she didn't know existed, of aspects of her new life and role that apparently came with limitations she had never been told about. The carved figures on the door now seemed to be watching her, silent witnesses to a moment that was clearly more important than she had initially realized. In the distance, she could hear the familiar sounds of castle life continuing. Normally the soft murmur of staff conversations, the gentle chiming of a distant clock, the rustle of papers being organized for the day's business. But here, in this corridor, before this particular door, everything felt suspended in a moment that would require careful navigation. The morning sun continued to stream through the tall windows, casting the same warm light that had seemed so welcoming when she had begun her walk through the castle. Now, that same light illuminated a situation that felt far more complex than anything she had anticipated, when she had simply decided to explore a part of her home that she had never seen. The tension in the corridor was thick enough to cut with a knife as Camilla slowly released her grip on the door handle. Her mind raced with questions, but her years of experience in delicate social situations had taught her the importance of maintaining composure even when faced with unexpected challenges. She turned to face the guard and the staff member, her expression calm but expectant, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of this bewildering situation. The staff member, whose name was Jeffrey and who had served the royal household for nearly 2 decades, cleared his throat nervously before speaking. His voice carried the weight of someone who had been put in an impossible position, caught between his loyalty to the king and his respect for the queen consort. He explained that the Prince of Wales, using Charles's former title, which was still sometimes used in official palace communications, had given specific instructions regarding access to this particular wing of the castle. According to Jeffrey's carefully worded explanation, the area beyond the ornate door contained sensitive materials and documents related to ongoing royal business that required the highest levels of security and confidentiality. The restriction wasn't personal, he assured her, but was part of long-standing protocols that governed access to certain classified areas of the castle. However, even as he spoke these words, something in his manner suggested that this explanation was either incomplete or not entirely truthful. Camilla listened politely to the explanation, but her instincts, sharpened by years of navigating the complex world of royal politics, told her that there was much more to this situation than what was being revealed. She had been involved in enough royal business over the past year to know that such restrictions were usually communicated clearly to all relevant family members, especially when they involved areas of the castle that appeared to be in regular use. As Jeffrey continued his explanation, describing various security protocols and administrative necessities, Camilla noticed details that didn't quite add up. The corridor showed signs of recent foot traffic, with the carpet slightly worn in patterns that suggested regular use by someone who knew this area well. The brass fixtures were polished to a brightness that indicated daily attention from the housekeeping staff. This didn't seem like a storage area for old documents or a space that was only occasionally accessed for official business. Moreover, she had seen Charles disappear down this corridor on several occasions over the past few months, usually in the late afternoons, when he thought she was occupied with her own duties. At the time, she had assumed he was simply attending to routine business or perhaps taking some private time in a study or office she wasn't familiar with. Now, however, those casual observations took on a different significance. The guard, whose name tag identified him as Officer Thompson, remained at attention throughout Jeffrey's explanation. But Camilla could see subtle signs of discomfort in his posture. His eyes occasionally flicked toward the door, as if he was concerned about something or someone on the other side hearing the conversation. This behavior was highly unusual for palace security staff, who were typically trained to remain completely focused on their immediate duties, regardless of what was happening around them. After Jeffrey finished his explanation, an uncomfortable silence settled over the small group. Camilla realized that she was at a crossroads that would define not just this moment, but potentially her entire relationship with her husband and her role within the royal family. She could accept the explanation at face value, maintain the peace and return to her quarters with questions unanswered. Or she could press for more information, risking a confrontation that might reveal truths she wasn't prepared to handle. Her decision was influenced by a sound that came from behind the ornate door. A soft voice that was unmistakably female, speaking in hushed tones to someone else. The voice was unfamiliar to Camilla, but it had a quality that suggested intimacy and comfort, as if the speaker was very much at home in whatever space lay beyond the carved wooden barrier. Jeffrey's face went pale when he heard the voice, and Officer Thompson's professional composure cracked slightly as he shot a quick, worried glance at the staff member. It was clear that the sound from behind the door had revealed something that their carefully prepared explanations hadn't anticipated. The presence of someone in that restricted area suggested that the space was not simply a repository for documents or a security-sensitive office. Camilla's mind began to piece together fragments of information that she had previously dismissed or overlooked. Charles's unusual schedule changes over recent months, his tendency to become evasive when she asked about certain meetings or appointments, and his increasingly distant behavior during their private moments together. There had been phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, correspondence that he kept separate from his usual official mail, and a general sense that there were aspects of his daily life that he was keeping carefully separate from their shared existence. The voice behind the door spoke again, this time with a slight laugh that carried a warmth and familiarity that sent a chill down Camilla's spine. It wasn't the voice of a secretary or assistant conducting official business. It was the voice of someone who felt comfortable enough to laugh freely, someone who clearly spent enough time in that space to feel completely at home there. Officer Thompson made a slight move, as if to position himself more directly between Camilla and the door, a gesture that was subtle but unmistakable in its intent. Jeffrey, meanwhile, began speaking again, his words coming faster now as he tried to redirect the conversation and encourage the Queen Consort to return to the main areas of the castle. His suggestions about other areas she might like to explore and upcoming appointments that might require her attention felt forced and desperate. But Camilla was no longer listening to their carefully crafted redirections. Her attention was focused on the sounds coming from behind the door, trying to identify not just the voice but the context of the conversation taking place. She could hear the rustle of papers, the soft clink of china suggesting tea or coffee was being served, and the kind of relaxed conversation that typically took place in comfortable private settings. The realization that began to form in her mind was both devastating and clarifying. The pieces of Charles's behavior over recent months suddenly fit together in a pattern that she had been unconsciously avoiding. The mysterious appointments, the increased security around certain areas of the castle, the subtle changes in the way some staff members interacted with her. All of these things now seemed to point toward a truth that she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. As she stood there in the corridor, weighing her options and trying to process the implications of what she was discovering, Camilla became aware that this moment would likely be remembered as a turning point. Whatever decision she made next would set the tone for how she would navigate the complex realities of her role as Queen Consort and her relationship with her husband. The morning sun had shifted slightly, and the light streaming through the tall windows now cast different shadows across the ornate door and the people gathered before it. The carved figures on the door seemed to take on new meaning, their silent faces appearing to judge the modern drama, unfolding in their presence. Jeffrey made one more attempt to guide the conversation toward a peaceful resolution, suggesting that perhaps this matter could be discussed with His Majesty at a more appropriate time and in a more private setting. His words carried an undertone of pleading, as if he understood that the situation was rapidly moving beyond his ability to control or contain. But Camilla had spent too many years learning to read between the lines of diplomatic language and carefully phrased explanations. She understood that what was being offered was an opportunity to maintain plausible deniability, to pretend that she hadn't heard what she had heard, or realized what she was beginning to understand. It was an invitation to participate in whatever elaborate arrangement had been created to keep her separated from whatever was happening behind that door. The choice before her was clear, even if the consequences were not. She could walk away, maintain the status quo, and continue living with the growing sense that there were fundamental aspects of her life and marriage that were being carefully managed and controlled without her knowledge. Or she could insist on the truth, regardless of what that truth might reveal about her husband, her marriage, and her future as queen consort. Camilla's decision came with a surge of determination that surprised even herself. Years of diplomatic training and careful social navigation had taught her the art of graceful retreat, but something about this moment demanded a different approach. She looked directly at Jeffrey, her voice steady and unmistakably authoritative as she spoke words that would change everything that followed. She informed both men that as queen consort, she had the right to access any area of the castle that wasn't specifically designated for security purposes, and that she intended to exercise that right immediately. Furthermore, she wanted to speak directly with whoever was behind the door, as it was clear that this was not simply a matter of document storage or administrative security. Her tone carried the weight of someone who had spent years learning to command respect in difficult situations. Jeffrey's face went through a series of expressions that ranged from panic to resignation, as he realized that his careful explanations had not achieved their intended purpose. Officer Thompson seemed to be calculating his options, clearly torn between his orders to prevent access and his training to respect the royal family's authority. The tension in the corridor reached a breaking point, as both men realized they were facing a situation that their protocols hadn't adequately prepared them to handle. The sound of movement came from behind the door, followed by urgent whispered conversation. It was clear that the occupants of the room had heard at least part of the exchange in the corridor, and were now aware that their privacy had been discovered. Camilla could hear footsteps moving quickly across what sounded like a carpeted floor, and the soft sound of a door closing within the room, suggesting there might be multiple exits or additional chambers beyond the main area. Jeffrey made one last desperate attempt to maintain control of the situation by suggesting that protocol required him to contact His Majesty before any access could be granted to this particular area. He reached for the phone on his belt, clearly hoping that involving Charles directly would either provide him with clear instructions on how to handle this unprecedented situation, or would give whoever was behind the door time to make alternative arrangements. But Camilla was no longer interested in protocols or careful diplomatic solutions. She stepped forward, gently but firmly moving past Officer Thompson, and placed her hand back on the ornate door handle. Her action was deliberate and decisive, making it clear that she intended to enter regardless of the objections or concerns of the staff members present. The door opened more easily than she had expected, swinging inward to reveal a beautifully appointed sitting room that was unlike any other space she had seen in the castle. The room was decorated with a warmth and personal touch that was distinctly different from the formal grandeur of the official royal apartments. Hunkable armchairs were arranged around a fireplace that showed signs of regular use, and the walls were adorned with photographs and artwork that spoke of personal taste rather than official royal protocol. What struck Camilla immediately was how lived-in the space felt. There were fresh flowers in elegant vases, current magazines scattered on a side table, and the lingering scent of perfume in the air that was definitely not her own. This was clearly not a storage room or an office, but rather a private apartment that someone used regularly and considered their personal sanctuary. The room appeared empty at first glance, but Camilla noticed signs of recent occupation everywhere. A tea service for two was set out on a low table, with one cup still steaming and showing lipstick marks on the rim. A silk scarf was draped over the back of one of the chairs, and a pair of women's reading glasses lay open beside what appeared to be a leather-bound journal. As she moved further into the room, she heard Jeffrey and Officer Thompson entering behind her, their voices raised in urgent whispered conversation as they tried to figure out how to handle this rapidly deteriorating situation. Their presence felt intrusive in the intimate atmosphere of the room, like uniformed representatives of a formal world that had no place in this carefully created private space. A soft sound from an adjoining room caught her attention, a door closing very quietly, followed by the faint sound of footsteps on what might have been a back staircase. It was clear that whoever had been in the sitting room when she arrived had quickly retreated to avoid a direct confrontation. The speed and efficiency of their exit suggested that this was not the first time such a situation had required careful management. Camilla walked slowly around the room, taking in details that painted a picture of regular, comfortable habitation by someone who clearly felt completely at home in this space. The books on the shelves included both classic literature and current bestsellers, suggesting someone with sophisticated but contemporary tastes. Personal photographs on the mantelpiece showed scenes from what appeared to be private gatherings and casual moments that had never been part of any official royal documentation. One photograph in particular caught her attention, a candid shot of Charles laughing at what appeared to be a private dinner party. His expression relaxed and genuinely happy in a way that she hadn't seen in their recent private moments together. The setting looked like it could have been this very room, though from an angle that didn't reveal enough detail to be certain. The implications of what she was discovering settled over her with a weight that was both devastating and oddly relieving. The months of Charles's distant behavior, the unexplained absences, the sense that there were aspects of his life that were being carefully hidden from her. All of these things now had a clear explanation, but understanding the situation was very different from knowing how to respond to it. Geoffrey approached her cautiously, his voice even more strained than before, as he attempted to provide some sort of explanation for what she was seeing. He spoke about the room being used for private meetings with certain advisors and the need for confidential spaces where sensitive royal business could be conducted without the usual formalities and protocols that governed official interactions. But his words rang hollow in the face of the obviously personal nature of the space. This was not a meeting room or an office, but rather someone's private living area that had been carefully maintained and regularly used. The feminine touches throughout the room, from the choice of fabrics to the arrangement of furniture, made it clear that this space had been designed for and by someone who spent significant time here. Behind Geoffrey, Officer Thompson remained near the door, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation, but uncertain about what his role should be now that the area he had been guarding had been breached. His training had prepared him to prevent unauthorized access, but it hadn't covered what to do when someone with legitimate authority insisted on entering despite orders to the contrary. Camilla turned to face both men, her composure maintained despite the emotional turmoil she was experiencing internally. She asked direct questions about who used this room, how long it had been set up in this way, and whether Charles was aware that she had been prevented from accessing this area. Her questions were calm but pointed, designed to extract information rather than to express anger or make accusations. The answers that came were evasive and contradictory, confirming her growing suspicion that this situation involved deliberate deception rather than simple administrative oversight. Geoffrey's explanations became increasingly strained as he tried to maintain the fiction that this was all part of normal royal protocol, while standing in a room that clearly contradicted everything he was saying. As she pressed for more specific information, the sound of rapid footsteps in the corridor outside suggested that word of this situation was spreading through the castle's communication networks. The discreet but efficient way that royal staff managed sensitive situations was clearly being activated, with various personnel being notified and positioned to help contain whatever fallout might result from this discovery. The morning sun, which had seemed so welcoming when she began her exploration of the castle, now felt harsh and revealing as it streamed through the sitting room's elegant windows. The light illuminated every detail of the space that told a story of parallel lives and carefully maintained secrets that had finally been exposed by her determination to understand the boundaries that had been placed around her life as queen consort. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor grew louder and more purposeful, indicating that the situation had escalated beyond what Geoffrey and Officer Thompson could handle on their own. Camilla recognized the particular rhythm and authority of the approaching steps even before Charles appeared in the doorway, his face a carefully controlled mask that she had learned to read over their many years together. Charles paused at the threshold of the sitting room, taking in the scene before him with the kind of quick assessment that comes from years of managing difficult situations. His eyes moved from Camilla's composed but determined expression to Geoffrey's obvious distress, then to Officer Thompson's uncomfortable stance near the door. The weight of the moment settled over all of them as everyone realized that this confrontation could no longer be avoided or diplomatically redirected. When Charles finally spoke, his voice carried the measured tone he used for handling state matters, but Camilla could detect the underlying tension that suggested he understood the gravity of what had been discovered. He dismissed Geoffrey and Officer Thompson with a few quiet words, making it clear that this conversation would continue privately between husband and wife. The two staff members retreated quickly, clearly relieved to escape a situation that had moved far beyond their ability to manage or control. Alone now in the intimate sitting room, Charles and Camilla faced each other across a space that represented far more than just another area of the castle. The room seemed to hold its breath as both of them considered how to navigate a conversation that would inevitably reveal truths that had been carefully hidden and potentially reshape their marriage and their roles within the royal family. Charles moved slowly into the room, his familiarity with the space evident in the way he navigated around the furniture, and automatically straightened a photograph that had been slightly askew. These small, unconscious actions confirmed what Camilla had already begun to understand: that this was a place where he spent significant time and felt completely comfortable, perhaps more comfortable than he did in their shared private quarters. The conversation that followed was unlike any they had ever had during their marriage. Charles began with explanations that attempted to frame the situation in terms of necessity, protocol, and the complex demands of royal life. He spoke about the need for private spaces where he could meet with advisors, conduct sensitive business, and occasionally retreat from the overwhelming responsibilities of being king. But as he continued speaking, his explanations began to reveal more than they concealed. References to someone who understands the unique pressures of this life and arrangements that have been necessary for my well-being painted a picture that went far beyond professional necessity. Camilla listened without interruption, allowing him to construct his version of events while she processed the implications of what she was hearing. The personal items scattered throughout the room told their own story, one that contradicted Charles's careful explanations. The silk scarf draped over the chair was clearly expensive and chosen with particular taste. The books on the shelves included titles that suggested someone with interests that aligned closely with Charles's own passions for architecture, gardening, and environmental conservation. The photographs on the mantelpiece showed moments of genuine happiness and relaxation that seemed to capture a version of Charles that she rarely saw anymore. When Charles finished his initial explanation, silence settled over the room like a heavy curtain. Camilla understood that she had reached another decision point, one that would determine not just how this conversation continued, but how their marriage would function going forward. She could accept his explanations, participate in maintaining whatever arrangements had been created, and return to a version of their life together that acknowledged certain realities without confronting them directly. Instead, she chose to speak with the same directness that had brought her to this room in the first place. Her questions were specific and pointed, designed to move the conversation past diplomatic language and careful explanations toward honest acknowledgement of what was actually happening. She asked about the woman whose presence was so clearly evident throughout the room, about how long these arrangements had been in place, and about what role she was expected to play in a situation she had never been consulted about. Charles's responses revealed the complex web of justifications and compromises that had been constructed around this situation. He spoke about the pressures of royal life, the difficulty of maintaining personal relationships under constant public scrutiny, and the necessity of having spaces and connections that provided genuine comfort and understanding. His words suggested that this arrangement had evolved gradually over time, becoming more established and elaborate as it proved to provide something that was missing from his official life. What became clear through their conversation was that this situation represented more than just marital infidelity or personal betrayal. It was a symptom of the fundamental challenges facing a modern royal family, trying to balance public duty with private happiness, official protocols with human needs, and traditional expectations with contemporary realities. The woman whose presence was so evident in the room, Charles explained, was someone who had understood these pressures and had been willing to accept a role that provided companionship and understanding without the complications that would come from any public acknowledgement of their relationship. The arrangement had been carefully managed to avoid scandal while providing Charles with the emotional support that he felt unable to find elsewhere. Camilla's response to these revelations surprised even herself. Rather than anger or devastation, she found herself feeling a complex mixture of disappointment, understanding, and clarity about the real nature of her position within the royal family. The conversation that followed was remarkably calm and practical, focusing on how they would navigate this new understanding, rather than on assigning blame or expressing hurt feelings. They discussed the practical implications of the situation, including how it would affect their public appearances, their private life together, and their respective roles within the royal family. Charles seemed relieved that the conversation was taking a pragmatic rather than emotional direction, though Camilla could see that he was still uncertain about what her ultimate response would be to these revelations. The solution they began to construct was unconventional but realistic, given the unique circumstances of their lives. It involved acknowledgement of the existing arrangements while establishing clear boundaries and expectations about how their marriage would function going forward. They talked about maintaining their public partnership while accepting that their private lives might need to operate according to different principles than those assumed by the outside world. As their conversation continued, the morning sun moved across the sky, changing the light in the sitting room and highlighting different aspects of the space that had become the setting for this fundamental shift in their relationship. The room that had initially seemed like evidence of betrayal began to feel more like a symbol of the compromises and accommodations that their unique life circumstances required. The outcome of their discussion was not the dramatic confrontation or emotional devastation that might have been expected from such a discovery. Instead, it was a mature recognition of the complex realities they both faced, and a commitment to finding ways to make their marriage work within those constraints. They emerged from the conversation with a clearer understanding of each other's needs and limitations, and with a plan for moving forward that acknowledged the truth of their situation rather than maintaining elaborate fictions. The private wing of Windsor Castle would continue to serve its purpose, but now with Camilla's knowledge and tacit acceptance rather than as a carefully guarded secret. The marriage between the king and queen consort would continue to serve its public function, but with a private understanding that allowed both of them to find the personal fulfillment they needed to sustain their roles. The guard would no longer need to prevent her access, because the secrets behind the ornate door had been revealed and acknowledged. What had begun as a moment of confrontation and revelation had transformed into an opportunity for honesty and realistic accommodation, setting the stage for a different kind of royal marriage than anyone might have expected.